Today's guest is Daniel Lapin. Daniel, tell us a little bit more regarding yourself and your present focus.
I'm a Jewish rabbi that made a specialty of something that, frankly, only a rabbi could explore and investigate without fear of being challenged as an anti-Semite or bigot. And that is the question which almost anybody who has not recently immigrated from outer Mongolia is puzzled by. And that is, why are Jews so disproportionately good with money? Why is it that the people of Israel, going back as far as we can in time, looking at almost any period of history, and looking in almost every country in the world in which they've lived, Jews excel with money. And the pattern in the United States, where Jews constitute 1.5% of the population, and yet constitute 20 to 40% of the names on the Forbes list of the 400 richest Americans, that tells us that there is a mystery here. And I set out to make it my work to solve that mystery. And my hope was that I would find out that what makes this work is something that everybody can employ in their business lives, regardless of their ethnic background.
And from your findings, can you share some of the most interesting points that you came across? Because success usually leaves clues. There's some recurring themes over and over again.
Yes, of course. Well, the book that resulted from this research is a book called Thou Shall Prosper, The 10 Commandments for Making Money. And in it, I've distilled my work down to the 10 basic principles. And in answer to your question as to what was interesting, for me, one of the most interesting parts of the work was what I was doing up front, which was investigating the conventional explanations for this phenomenon. Because, for instance, the old Oxford English Dictionary before World War II used to define the word Jew as a verb, as in to Jew somebody, meaning to cheat them.
That's not nice.
Well, the world doesn't go by the rules of what is nice or how we'd like it to be. It's important in business to function on the basis of how the world really works, not on the basis of how we wish it would work.
Sure, agree.
And so the theory I had to investigate was, is it possible that Jews prosper because they are morally flexible? And in doing so, I also had to acknowledge that old sayings and slogans like honesty is the best policy is not entirely true. The best policy is total moral flexibility, as long as you're not in it for the long term. In other words, on a deal-by-deal basis, flexibility is just fine. But if you intend remaining in business for a while, then reputation becomes very important, branding becomes very important, And so honesty is the best policy only over the long term. And so what I did was I had to try and find people who have done business with Jews for many, many years. And when I found a statistically significant sample of those people, I asked them that question. And all of them, without hesitation, spoke about the long relationships based on integrity and transparency and honesty, and the friendships that resulted. And so I realized that clearly Jews are just like everybody else. There are a few bad apples in every group. Overwhelmingly, the reason that Jews functioned well in business certainly was not because they cheated. And the reality, of course, is that we all do best economically when we have a large group of people who know us and like us and trust us. And so clearly, if the secret of Jewish success was moral flexibility, by now nobody would be willing to do business with Jews, and rightfully so. And so it wasn't hard to dismiss that theory. So that was one of the interesting things. Would you like to know another false theory?
Sure. One of them before that, I read a lot of information and some of your interviews, and one thing that you said in a previous show that kind of struck a chord was that all of us, we kind of live in a small village, and each of us need to specialize, meaning saying no to probably 99.9% of things and only focusing on one thing. Because if you do that and you kind of become the first one that people on people's minds in order to solve a specific problem, they're thinking of you, you will prosper. Would you agree?
No, that's obvious. And Adam Smith, the Scottish economist, was the first person to put that down in his 1776 book. But the secret to specialization in ancient Jewish wisdom goes beyond. In other words, Adam Smith's observation, and that of many other 18th century economists, that specialization works, is mechanistic rather than moral. And so we all agree, obviously, that that somebody gets better and better at his work the more he specializes on it. That's what we mean when we use the word professional. And that's why there are expressions like a jack of all trades is master of none. But the moral picture of it is also very interesting. And I define that in terms of the circumstance you would have if you imagined a workshop in the early 1800s, such as Samuel Colt's workshop in Connecticut, in which he was making revolvers. And the way that workshop used to work is that 6 men would come in every morning and sit around a table, and they would talk while each one fashioned a revolver. Every now and then one would get up to use a tool against the wall, come back, and at the end of the day, if he finished a revolver in a day, which usually would not have been the case, but when he did finish a revolver, he'd sign his name at the bottom of the handle because he took personal pride. This was a gun that he made. Along came the boss, Samuel Colt, and said, we're going to switch to a specialization system. And in this system, he said, from now onwards, Alan, you're going to make only barrels. And Bert, you're going to make only triggers. And Charlie, you are going to make only the revolving chamber. And David, you are going to make the handle. And Edward, you are going to assemble everything into one gun. And when it's finished, you put it in the basket. Well, obviously, while the men objected to that at the outset, it soon became apparent that they were making many more guns a week this way than they were the old way. Now, here's where it gets interesting. What would have happened in the old system if David didn't show up for work today? How do Alan and Bertie and Charlie and Edward feel? Well, they're fine because the beer that Samuel Colt brought into the workshop every midday now there'd be more because only 5 people are going to be drinking instead of 6. No problem. But what happens under the new system if David doesn't show up? It's quite different because David's absence holds up the whole work. They need him. And so they run over to his house to find out if he's okay. Is he sick? Does he need help? Is there a problem? And this is the overall moral blueprint for human economic cooperation. The idea that God favors activities that bring people together. Individualized work doesn't bring us together. We each operate independently of one another. Specialization means that I need you, and I need you, and I need the other one. I need everybody because I'm only filling in one piece of the puzzle, and the puzzle doesn't get built if everyone else doesn't participate. So that would be one example of how the moral matrix of ancient Jewish wisdom serves a very valuable purpose.
One thing that billionaire Ken Fisher once said in one of his books, one of his many books, he said about one of the most common ways that entrepreneurs fail is due to lack of focus and lack of social network. And on that point, I would like to hear your thoughts regarding Jewish wisdom regarding social networks.
Well, Malcolm Gladwell actually did quite well. He quoted several studies in which they show that the most reliable correlation in the United States for people who have made significant money is a large list of contacts. In other words, the number of people you know who would take your phone call. Now, in that context, I want to stress that I'd rather have 5 customers than 5,000 friends on Facebook.
Sure, obviously.
And so the idea of genuine friendship, genuine connections, people, as I said, who know you, like you, and trust you, tremendously important. No question about it, tremendously important. And this is one of the reasons that the biblical approach to finance favors equity funding over debt funding very heavily, because debt funding plays a role in driving people apart. If I owe you money, I want to avoid you. I don't feel like running into you. But if I'm an investor in your company, I go out of my way to see how you're doing. I ask how things are. Can I help you with anything? And so we find a very definite preference for equity over debt, precisely for these reasons. They build the social network, they don't damage it.
Sure, and that makes sense because when you are contributing that, you essentially don't care about the business. All you care about is your return. And when you are equity investor, you have some skin in the game. So you are contributing with probably some knowledge that the other guy doesn't have. So both of you win.
Yeah, I agree.
And on that point, can you how long did it take you to write this book? Some of your more interesting findings, some things that you weren't expecting to discover, and then you did. So can you share some of your thoughts?
Yes, well, in answer to your first question, um, it's a little bit like somebody who asks the plumber, you know, why does it cost $60 to just fix a little leak in the pipe?
He knows where to fix it.
And the plumber says, well, that's my work. The guy said, yeah, but it took you 5 minutes. Yeah, it took me 20 years of apprenticeship,
Sure,
and then it took me 5 minutes.
obviously.
And so to write the book only took 7 or 8 months. To gain the information took about 15 years. So surprising findings. Well, one of the surprising findings was that I had always wrongly assumed that wealth creation correlated with IQ, with intelligence. And again, I was so surprised that we reworked the data several times to make sure there wasn't a mistake here. But the answer, once we got it, sort of made sense, which is that if you look at the typical intelligence bell curve in random distribution of population, it is certainly true that down at the low end, where IQ is down at the range of 70, it is perfectly true that that people at that range are not engaging in entrepreneurial activity. They're barely holding a job, if that, and nobody at that level is making any money, frankly. But over at the other end of the bell curve, when you're hitting the IQ figure, you know, 140, 150, 160, that level, they're not making money either. You know what they're doing? They're on the faculties of universities, or they're playing around with puzzles from Mensa. No, these people are appalling at money. They can barely manage their own, let alone do anything else. So it was very, very surprising to me that very high IQ is just as much of an impediment to making money as very low IQ.
I think they overcomplicate things, I think. And
they totally overcomplicate things, but bringing it back to relationships as well. Look, I'm sorry, but I don't like buying a car or getting a pair of glasses or doing anything from somebody who is so obviously so much smarter than me that, number one, he's looking down at me. There are so many calculations going on in his head that I don't begin to understand. I'm just not comfortable. Forget it.
Sure.
I'm like everyone else. And so the truth is that in the wide, broad band of the IQ curve where most of us live, that's where money making is. It has very little to do with IQ. There's almost no correlation at all outside of the extremes. That was a surprise to me. Basically, you can do perfectly well with street knowledge. You don't need academic university knowledge. Basically, knowing how the world, and I always use the phrase, knowing how the world really works. That's all you need. Nothing more than that.
I think the most important thing, at least from my end, from my understanding of life at this point in time, I think social IQ is much more important, because when you start learning how to deal with people, seeing through their eyes and really understanding where they're coming from, it makes your life easier, because you can go navigate through all the BS and go directly to the point and solve things for you. Would you agree?
Yes, and social IQ is very much a part of knowing how the world really works. Understanding that you're never going to be able to do it all yourself. And understanding that when people like you, you're going to do a whole lot better than when people fear you. And that and many, many, many other little pieces of information many other data points on social IQ. I could not agree with you more. It's absolutely fundamental.
I think one of the most important experiences that entrepreneurs must go through, at least in my opinion, is go selling door on door, because it evolves your social IQ tremendously. You really learn how to deal with people, because people don't want to deal with you, and you need to make a sale. So it's an interesting experience, and I really recommend it to most entrepreneurs, because if you are trying to kind of live under a rock in your home, trying to invent some app that's putting you a really big lag behind when you learn how to deal with people every single day. Would you agree?
You and me sound exactly the same. Uh, I actually spent several summers as a student doing door-to-door sales, and I believe it equipped me valuably for both business and also for teaching. I've often said that the only people who don't have to learn how to sell door to door, the only people who are exempt from my advice to go and learn how to sell are justices on the United States Supreme Court who serve for life, and university professors with tenure. Everyone else should learn to sell.
Yeah, because it's a wonderful. I love it.
It's also,
I
it's a
love it.
wonderful profession. It's a wonderful profession because you can parachute into any city in the world. And if you're willing to sell, you can write your own ticket.
That's true. You can go to a different country, and in the same day you get a job. So no worries there.
Yeah.
And on kind of evolving our conversation, you sound really passionate about the findings that you got from this book. What are some more experiences that you would like to share that you think that are meaningful for our entrepreneurial audience to know?
Well, of course, it was also surprising for me to discover that many people assume, when I spoke to people and interviewed people, many of the people I interviewed assumed that all Jews love each other and that Jews constitute this great big club of successful people who devotedly advance one another's interests, taking, it's like a secret society where they're all helping each other. And people think, well, I just got to get into that group and then they'll take care of me.
Yeah.
They thought that.
Sure.
And so I had to enlighten them as to what life in a Jewish synagogue is like. You know, a seething cauldron of political intrigue with stabbings in the back and betrayals and treachery. So no, it's nothing like that. Jews are just like other people. You know, we all like some people. There are other people we dislike, and we certainly do not act in a tribalistic way to dedicate ourselves to taking care of everybody in the. It doesn't work like that at all. So that was a little bit of an interesting experience, and I think on the accurate side, on the side that did work and that showed me how the world really works in this way, I was also surprised at how incredibly important it was to believe in the morality of making money. I'm not saying that every single person who makes money is a saint, but neither is he a sinner. The fact is that decent people can never succeed fully at any activity that deep in their hearts they consider to be morally reprehensible. And because the message from the culture is so relentlessly anti-business, it becomes very difficult. It's not just that we have expressions like stinking rich or filthy rich. It's not only that. It's also when charitable, wealthy philanthropists make gifts, to schools or hospitals or whatever it is. I keep on hearing the same phrase. I hear the reporters saying, "Isn't it wonderful to see him giving back to society?"
I could never understand that word, that sentence, because it's precisely because he is giving to society that is in a point that is able to do whatever he wants. It's like
Well,
he owes something that doesn't make sense to me. Never did.
you are, of course, 100% correct. I'm in full agreement with you. Most people don't get that. Most people assume that if giving charity is giving back to society, then making the money in the first place is ripping off society, obviously.
So that's nonsense.
The trouble is that it's widely believed. When politicians say, and we've heard this constantly until recently, we've heard this phrase, the rich are not giving their fair share.
That's another one. That's one of the other ones that complete BS.
It's shockingly dangerous, because what the politician is meticulously avoiding is defining what rich is. And he's trying to get your vote by telling you he'll take money from your neighbor today. And you're too dumb to figure out that tomorrow you're going to be called rich. So that's a huge problem. The other problem is that he does not define what the word fair means. How much of my money is it fair for you to take exactly? Could you tell me that?
Sure. How much have you earned to take from me?
Yeah. So these are always, you find also the term unearned income. I find that to be an obscenity. If I put my money at risk and through good fortune and great care, I actually make a return, it's called unearned. Oh, really? It's dreadful. And there's just generally an attempt at conflating poverty with virtue in the culture.
Yeah, that's a common misknowledge that doesn't serve and will never.
Damaging.
Yeah, and it's tremendously damaging. We agree, and it will never serve anyone. It's just popular conversations that essentially lead nowhere.
Yeah,
Regarding, you sound really passionate regarding your book, and I also would like to know some of your favorite books besides your own. Probably some of them that are not. Kind of mainstream, some more specialized books that you would like to share with our audience, because we are a big reader group here.
I like reading history books by Paul Johnson, is a British historian. I like books on war by John Keegan. He's got a particularly good one called The Mask of Command. I like those. I enjoy the fiction of Alexander McCall Smith. I'm just trying to think what else. You see, I'm ADD, so I read lots of books at the same time.
Sure. Take your time, because we already have it at our website. We have a list about 200 or 300 books, and these are kind of well known. Some of them not, but we are always looking for pearls of wisdom from people such as yourself that might know some other titles that we don't.
Are any of the books of Thomas Sowell on your list?
Yes, we have a couple of them here.
Yeah. That's I think that's crucial. Absolutely crucial.
Because taking from your points in the beginning, from one to know where to go, you need to first understand how the world went to that specific point. So understanding what did happen in order for you to be where you are. So it's kind of, usually it's a twofold. It's you understanding yourself and then understanding the world and where the world is evolving. And on that point as well, I would like to know advice to your younger self. What would you say?
Well, yeah. In general, of course, learn how the world really works. But of course, that is too much of a generalization. To one thing I would say, I like the way you phrase it. You threw me there for a moment. But I appreciate how you phrased it. I'll tell you one thing I would tell my younger self. Make decisions with your head, not with your heart. Think every decision very carefully and know that your heart is pulling you in a direction antithetical to where your head would take you. And that applies to all matters: financial, relationship, romantic, all decisions. That would be a big one. Another one would have been, I would have contradicted what everyone else was telling me, which is choose a career in something you love. And I would have said absolutely wrong. Choose a career in which you can serve the most number of people with your skills and talents, and then learn to love doing that.
That's a big one. That's a big one. Because if you love something where the output doesn't serve enough people, it's essentially a hobby. And if you, on the other hand, if you don't really like what you're doing, even if you are like on serving a benchmark that will serve a lot of people, you probably won't do well as well because you hate doing it. So it's that's interesting.
Yeah, because again, I as a young person, I don't think I realized that the world is entirely indifferent to my desires. It responds only to what I do. It's performance that matters. And so I tell people going in for job interviews, if the interviewer asks, what do you like doing? That's a trap. That's a trick question. Because the only thing you are there to do is to show the interviewer your passion for making the company at which you're interviewing more successful. That's all. Nobody really cares what your hobbies are. Nobody really cares what you would like to do. The world is interested in what you can do for other people.
Gotcha. And for the future, where do you see yourself heading moving forward?
Well, I would very much like to finish my new book. That's about I mean, that's the main thing I'm focused on. And at the same time, I would like to be able to train a few top-rate young people to build their ability to be able to teach this material and to help to spread it.
Gotcha. And where can people get a hold of you if they would like to know more?
These days, the easiest way is my website, which is rabidaniellapin.com.
Gotcha. Daniel, it was wonderful having you with us today. We'll speak soon.
Thank you very much indeed. I was intrigued by your questions. If I may say so, and I mean this quite sincerely, you will not hear me say this on many other interviews, but your questions are several orders of magnitude above the conventional, much more thoughtful and much more probing.
Oh, thank you. That's nice to hear.